The Andorran Confederacy spanned countless star systems, each one home to unique species and ecosystems. Among them were the Drathrax, a fiercely territorial and predatory race native to the shadow jungles of Tarsus IV. Their society revolved around strength, hierarchy, and survival, values forged by millennia of brutal natural selection. Trust, to them, was a rarity, reserved for bloodkin and battle-forged allies. So, when humans were admitted into the Confederacy, many Drathrax viewed them with suspicion, if not outright disdain. Humans were puzzling, fragile, yet persistent. They lacked the claws, venom, or armored hides that other species used to navigate a dangerous galaxy. What they did possess, however, was an unyielding drive to connect to truth and transcend time spans to the global perspectives that others had never seen. On a crisp morning aboard the Orion Ascendant, a human exploration vessel stationed near Yivrin 4, Ellie Mason prepared for her meeting with the Drathrak Council. The planet below was a nexus of biological diversity, a verdant world teeming with life. It was also the site of escalating tension between the Drathrax and the Equalities, an aquatic species vying for control of Yivrin's rich resources. Ellie stood at the viewport, sipping a steaming mug of tea. The planet's surface glowed green and blue, its swirling clouds casting shifting shadows over endless forests and winding rivers. She had spent months studying the cultures of both the Drathrax and Equalities, hoping to mediate their dispute. Her mission was simple: prevent war. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts, followed by the calm voice of the ship's AI, Aegis. "Ambassador Mason, your shuttle is prepared. The Drathrak delegation is awaiting your arrival." "Thank you, Aegis," Ellie replied, setting her mug down. She adjusted her uniform, a simple gray suit adorned with the Confederacy's insignia, and stepped into the corridor. The walls of the ship hummed with life, a symphony of machinery and organic interfaces designed for exploration. The shuttle ride to the Drathrak mothership was brief but nerve-wracking. Ellie reviewed her notes, though she knew the Drathrak valued directness over rehearsed speeches. They respected strength, not just physical, but of character. As the shuttle docked, her resolve hardened. The interior of the Drathrak vessel was a stark contrast to the sleek, minimalist design of human ships. It was cavernous, with organic walls that seemed to pulse faintly like the heartbeat of a living creature. The air was thick with a metallic tang, and the low growl of distant machinery added to the ship's ominous ambience. Vakaroth, the Drathrak Alpha, awaited her in the central chamber. He towered over her, his 6 limbs resting at ease but ready to strike at a moment's notice. His armored scales glinted in the dim light, and his golden eyes studied Ellie with predatory intensity. "Human," he rumbled, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "You are smaller than I expected." Ellie suppressed a smile. "And you are as imposing as I imagined." A flicker of amusement crossed Vaktra's face, though it quickly vanished. He motioned for her to follow, leading her deeper into the chamber. Around them, other Drathrax watched silently, their clawed feet clicking against the floor. They stopped before a holographic map of Yivrin 4, its surface marked with contested territories. Vakrith gestured to the map. "The Aqualites encroach on our hunting grounds. Their presence is a threat to our survival." Ellie nodded, noting the strategic positioning of Drathrak dens in Aqualite colonies. "And they claim your expansion threatens their breeding waters," she said. Vakrith's tail lashed. "Weaklings always make excuses." Ellie met his gaze. "Strength isn't just about domination. It's about understanding your opponent and finding a solution that benefits both sides. That's why I'm here." Vakurth tilted his head, studying her. "You speak boldly for a species with no claws." "It's not claws that make a mediator effective," Ellie replied. "It's trust." "Oh, boy. Blah. Oh, boy. Buh, buh." Trust let out a guttural laugh. "Trust? In this galaxy, trust is a fool's hope." Ellie held her ground. "Then let me prove otherwise." The idea came to her suddenly, an audacious plan that she knew would either earn the Drathrak's respect or seal her fate. She turned to Vakurth, her voice steady. "Lend me one of your cubs," she said. The chamber fell silent. Vakurth's eyes narrowed. "Explain yourself." Ellie stepped closer to the hologram, her movements deliberate. "You say humans are weak, untrustworthy. Give me the chance to prove you wrong. Let me care for one of your young. If I fail, you'll have your proof, but if I succeed, perhaps you'll see that trust is not a weakness, but a strength." Vakurth's growl echoed through the chamber. "You ask for what no Drathrak would dare offer. Our cubs are our future, guarded with our lives. To entrust one to an outsider is exactly what it will take to build a bridge between us," Ellie interrupted. The room buzzed with low murmurs. Vakurth turned to his council, exchanging sharp glances and guttural whispers. Finally, he raised a clawed hand, silencing them. "You are either brave or foolish, human," he said. "Very well, you shall have your test." The look that the sorter, the cub assigned to Ellie, was barely 3 months old. Despite his small size, he was already a formidable presence, with sharp teeth and claws that could tear through flesh. When Vakurth handed him over, the cub snarled, his 6 limbs flailing. Ellie remained calm, lowering herself to the cub's eye level. "Hello, Rilek," she said softly. "I know I look strange to you, but we're going to be friends." The cub hissed, his tail snapping in warning. Ellie didn't flinch. Instead, she extended her hand, palm up, and waited. Minutes passed, tension thick in the air. Finally, curiosity overtook aggression, and the cub cautiously sniffed her fingers. Over the next few hours, Ellie worked to earn Rilek's trust. She mimicked the growls and gestures she had observed among the Drathraks, hoping to communicate in a way he understood. She offered him food, a carefully prepared meal based on Drathrak dietary requirements, and gave him space to explore his new environment. By the end of the day, Rilek was no longer hissing. He watched Ellie with wary eyes, his posture less defensive. The real test came 2 days later during a routine outing to study Yivrin's ecosystem. Ellie brought Rilek along, carrying him in a specially designed harness that allowed him to cling to her back. The jungle was alive with sounds, its dense foliage teeming with life. Ellie had just finished collecting samples from a flowering plant when she heard it. A low, guttural growl that sent shivers down her spine. She turned slowly, her heart pounding. A massive predator, unlike anything she had encountered before, emerged from the shadows. Its eyes gleamed with hunger, its serrated jaws dripping with saliva. Ellie knew she couldn't outrun it. Instead, she crouched low, shielding Rilek with her body. The cub clung to her tightly, his small frame trembling. As the predator lunged, Ellie grabbed a branch and swung it with all her strength, aiming for the creature's sensitive eyes. The predator roared in pain, momentarily stunned. Seizing the opportunity, Ellie scrambled toward a cluster of rocks, creating a makeshift barrier. She activated her comm device, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Ellie to Drathrek delegation. I need immediate extraction. Coordinates transmitted." Minutes felt like hours as she held her ground, using every ounce of her resourcefulness to keep the predator at bay. When the Drathraks arrived, led by Vakreth himself, the predator was driven off with a display of overwhelming force. Vakreth approached Ellie, his gaze unreadable. Rilek, still clinging to her, let out a soft growl, a sound not of fear but of affection. "You risked your life," Vavrith said. Ellie met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "That's what trust requires." For the first time, Vakrith inclined his head. "Perhaps," he said, "your species is not as weak as it appears. The jungle of Yvrin IV was no ordinary wilderness. It was a living labyrinth, teeming with bioluminescent plants, creatures that defied logic, and an atmosphere that buzzed with primal energy. Every step Ellie took was a reminder that this world was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Rilek clung to her back, his small but sharp claws gripping the fabric of her harness. It had been days since the Drathrak cub had been placed in her care, and though his initial hostility had diminished, Ellie could tell he was still wary. She didn't blame him. Trust wasn't something easily given in the wilds. As the sunlight filtered through the thick canopy above, Ellie adjusted the portable sensor strapped to her wrist. It beeped softly, scanning the environment for signs of aqualite incursions. The Drathrak delegation had granted her a temporary truce to explore the contested territories, but Ellie knew it was a fragile arrangement. The jungle, much like its inhabitants, was unforgiving. "Rilek," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "you doing okay back there?" The cub growled softly in response, a sound she had come to interpret as mild curiosity. He was observing everything around them, his golden eyes darting from the fluttering wings of a bright, bird-like creature to the shifting shadows of larger predators in the distance. Ellie smiled. "Good, let's keep moving." The purpose of her expedition was twofold. First, to understand the resource conflict between the Drathraks and the Aqualites by studying the land they both coveted. Second, and more critically, to deepen her bond with Rilek. She knew that her success, or failure, with the cub would dictate humanity's reputation in the Confederacy for decades to come. After hours of trekking, Ellie found a clearing by a slow-moving river. She set down her pack and let Rilek climb down. The cub stretched, his 6 limbs flexing as he sniffed the air. "Let's take a break," Ellie said, kneeling to unpack her supplies. She pulled out a small container of protein-rich snacks, tailored to Drathrak dietary needs. Placing a few pieces on a flat rock, she gestured toward Rilek. "Go ahead. It's all yours." The cub eyed the food warily, his tail flicking in suspicion. Ellie resisted the urge to speak again, knowing that pushing him could backfire. Instead, she busied herself with setting up a small scanning device, pretending not to watch him. After a moment, Rilek crept forward, his movements cautious but deliberate. He sniffed the food, then took a tentative bite. Ellie suppressed a grin as he quickly devoured the rest. "See?" she said softly. "Not so bad, is it?" Rilek growled again, this time a low, rumbling sound that Ellie interpreted as approval. As the afternoon wore on, Ellie focused on her scans, analyzing the soil composition and mapping the nearby water sources. Her findings confirmed what she had suspected. The land was a treasure trove of resources. The river contained minerals essential to both the Drathrax and the Aqualites, while the surrounding jungle was rich with game and vegetation. But it was more than just a resource hub. It was an ecosystem delicately balanced between predator and prey, hunter and hunted. Any disruption, whether by overhunting or territorial expansion, could send ripples through the entire environment. Ellie sighed, her thoughts heavy. She needed a solution that would satisfy both species without destroying the fragile balance of the jungle, but convincing two deeply mistrustful factions to cooperate felt like an impossible task. Her musings were interrupted by Rilek, who had wandered a few meters away to investigate a cluster of glowing flowers. The cub batted at the petals, his sharp claws careful not to tear them. Ellie watched, her heart warming at the sight. "You're not so different from us, you know," she murmured. "Curious, playful, stubborn." Rilek looked back at her, tilting his head as if he understood. As twilight descended, the jungle transformed. Bioluminescent fungi illuminated the forest floor, casting an eerie, otherworldly glow. Strange calls echoed through the trees, some melodic, others guttural. Ellie set up a small perimeter, using portable emitters that emitted a low-frequency hum designed to deter predators. Rilek curled up near her, his tail wrapped around his body. Ellie sat cross-legged beside him, her datapad glowing softly in the dim light. She recorded her observations of the day, adding notes about Rilek's behavior and the ecosystem's complexities. Oh, a sudden rustling in the bushes made her freeze. Rilek's ears perked up and he let out a low growl. Ellie reached for her stun baton, her pulse quickening. The rustling grew louder, and then a creature emerged, a sleek, quadrupedal predator with iridescent scales and glowing eyes. Its movements were fluid, its gaze locked on Ellie and Rilek. Ellie stood slowly, positioning herself between the predator and the cub. "Easy," she whispered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. The predator crouched, its muscles coiling like a spring. Ellie tightened her grip on the stun baton, her mind racing. She had no intention of killing the creature. Her goal was to protect Rilek and herself long enough for it to lose interest. As the predator lunged, Ellie sidestepped, swinging the baton in a wide arc. The weapon crackled with energy, grazing the creature's flank. It roared in pain, retreating a few steps, but not fleeing. Rilek, to Ellie's surprise, darted forward, letting out a fierce snarl. His tiny frame seemed inconsequential against the larger predator, but his defiance was palpable. Rilek, no. Before the situation could escalate further, a deafening roar echoed through the jungle. The predator froze, its glowing eyes flicking to the shadows. From the darkness, a massive figure emerged. Vakrath. The Drathrak Alpha moved with deliberate menace, his 6 limbs flexing as he let out another roar. The predator backed away, then turned and disappeared into the underbrush. Ellie exhaled sharply, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. Vakarith approached, his golden eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. "You are reckless, human," he growled. Ellie straightened, her voice steady, despite her exhaustion. "I did what I had to do to protect Rilek." Vakarith's gaze shifted to the cub, who had retreated to Ellie's side. Rilek chirped softly, nuzzling against her leg, a gesture of trust that did not go unnoticed. The Alpha's expression softened, though his tone remained gruff. "Perhaps you are not as fragile as you appear." Back at the Drathrak mothership, Ellie recounted her findings to the council, emphasizing the interconnected nature of the jungle's ecosystem. She explained how unchecked expansion by either faction could lead to catastrophic consequences, not just for the planet, but for their own survival. Well, Vakarith listened intently, his sharp features unreadable. When Ellie finished, he leaned forward, his claws tapping against the table. "You have proven your worth as a caretaker," he said. "But trust is not earned through words alone. What do you propose, human?" Ellie took a deep breath. A shared stewardship of the contested territories. The Drathraks and Aqualites can establish zones of cooperation, guided by ecological data and mutual oversight. It won't be easy, but it's the only way to preserve the balance of Yvrin 4 while meeting both of your needs. The council murmured among themselves, their voices a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Vakarth raised a hand, silencing them. "You speak of cooperation between predator and prey," he said. "A radical notion." "It's not about predator or prey," Ellie replied. "It's about survival together." Krith studied her for a long moment, then turned to Rilek, who sat at Ellie's feet. The cub let out a soft growl, his golden eyes full of trust. "Perhaps," Vakarth said finally, "there is merit in your vision." Ellie allowed herself a small smile. The first step had been taken, but the path ahead was still uncertain. As she left the chamber, Rilek trotting beside her, Ellie couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. In a galaxy defined by conflict, perhaps trust truly was humanity's greatest strength. The Drathrak mothership hung in the void above Yvrin 4 like a brooding beast, its organic armor-like surface bristling with weapons and antennae. Inside, Ellie Mason paced nervously in her quarters, the weight of her mission pressing heavily on her shoulders. Negotiations between the Drathraks and the Aquilites were set to resume tomorrow. But today, she faced an unexpected trial. Rilek had vanished. Ellie turned her room upside down, searching every corner, every crevice, where the young Drathrak cub could hide. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Had he wandered off? Had one of the skeptical Drathraks taken him to sabotage her mission? The intercom chimed, and the smooth, resonant voice of the ship's AI, Aegis, filled the room. "Ambassador Mason, sensors have detected movement near the lower decks, life signs consistent with Drathrak physiology." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. "That has to be Rilek. Can you pinpoint his location?" "Coordinates have been transmitted to your datapad," Aegis replied. "Thank you," Ellie said, grabbing her gear and bolting out of the room. The lower decks of the Drathrak mothership were a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors and cavernous chambers. Unlike the more polished areas where the Drathrak Council held their meetings, the lower decks were raw and unrefined, with walls that pulsed faintly as though alive. Ellie's footsteps echoed as she made her way through the twisting halls, her datapad guiding her toward Rilek's signal. Her mind reeled as she considered why the cub might have ventured here. Was he exploring, or had he been drawn by something or someone? A low growl reached her ears, pulling her out of her thoughts. Ellie froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her stun baton. The sound came from ahead, where the corridor widened into a shadowy chamber. Steeling herself, Ellie stepped forward. The scene that greeted her was both startling and bizarre. Rilek stood in the center of the chamber, his golden eyes locked on a strange creature. It was unlike anything Ellie had seen on the ship, a shimmering, amorphous being that seemed to shift and ripple as though made of liquid light. The air around it vibrated with an almost musical hum. "Rilek," Ellie called softly, not wanting to startle him or the creature. The cub turned, his tail flicking in agitation. He let out a low growl, but it wasn't directed at Ellie. It was a warning to the creature. Ellie approached cautiously, her eyes never leaving the shimmering form. "What is this?" she murmured. Her datapad beeped, struggling to analyze the entity. The readout was a mess of conflicting data, energy signatures that defied known physics, a fluctuating temperature that ranged from freezing to scorching in seconds. "Rillick," Ellie said again, her voice steady. "Come here, slowly." The cub hesitated, then took a tentative step toward her. The creature reacted instantly, emitting a high-pitched sound that made Ellie's ears ache. Rillick snarled, his small frame bristling with defiance. Ellie knew she had to act quickly. She crouched, extending her arms in a gesture of reassurance. "It's okay," she said, trying to project calm despite her racing heart. "We're leaving, together." Rillick seemed to understand. He darted toward Ellie, and she scooped him up, cradling him against her chest. The creature emitted another sound, this one softer, almost mournful. Ellie backed away, her instinct screaming at her to run, but she forced herself to move slowly, deliberately. When they were safely back in the corridor, Ellie let out a shaky breath. "What in the galaxy was that?" Rillick chirped softly, nuzzling against her, his earlier aggression replaced by a newfound sense of safety. Ellie wasted no time reporting the incident to Vakarith and the Drathrak Council. The Alpha listened intently as she described the creature, his expression darkening with every detail. "This anomaly does not belong here," Vakarith said, his voice a low growl. "It is a threat." Ellie frowned. It didn't seem overtly hostile, but its nature is unlike anything I've encountered before. "Do you think it's related to the ecosystem of Yivrin 4? Backert shook his head. "If it were, we would know of it. Our hunters have scoured that world for generations." One of the council members, a grizzled elder named Lirvak, leaned forward. "Perhaps it is not a Vivrin 4, but something brought there, a remnant of the ancient past or an intruder from beyond?" Ellie's curiosity deepened. The creature's presence could complicate the already delicate negotiations with the Aqualites. If it posed a threat to the Drathraks, it would undoubtedly be seen as leverage by the Aqualites, or worse, an excuse for conflict. Determined to uncover the truth, Ellie requested permission to return to the surface of Yivrin 4. Vakreth hesitated, but Rillick's attachment to her had not gone unnoticed. The Alpha reluctantly agreed, assigning a small contingent of Drathrak warriors to accompany her. The shuttle ride down was tense. Vakari himself led the expedition, his imposing presence a constant reminder of the stakes. Ellie kept Rillick close, the cub nestled securely in her harness. As they descended into the jungle, Ellie's mind raced with questions. What was the creature, and why had it appeared now? Was it connected to the resource conflict, or was it something entirely separate? The team landed near the river where Ellie had first conducted her ecological scans. The jungle was as vibrant as ever, its bioluminescent flora casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. Ellie activated her sensors, scanning for any sign of the anomaly. For hours they searched, the Drathraks moving with practiced precision. Vakrul's warriors fanned out, their claws ready to strike at the first hint of danger. It wasn't until dusk that Ellie's scanner picked up a faint signal, a trace of the same energy signature she had detected on the ship. "Over here!" she called, gesturing toward a cluster of massive, vine-covered trees. The team converged on the spot, their movements tense and deliberate. Ellie knelt, examining the ground. The soil was scorched in places, as though by intense heat, yet frost, clung to the edges of the burn marks. "This is where it was," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vakarth crouched beside her, his golden eyes scanning the area. "What does it mean?" Ellie shook her head. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not natural." A sudden rustling in the trees made everyone freeze. The warriors raised their weapons, their claws poised to strike. The shimmering creature emerged, its form shifting and pulsating as it hovered above the ground. The air around it vibrated with the same musical hum Ellie had heard before. Vakarth growled, his muscles coiled like a spring. "Stay back, human. This is no place for weakness." Ellie stood, holding Rilek close. "Wait," she said. "It hasn't attacked us. Let's not provoke it." The creature seemed to react to her voice, its form stabilizing slightly. It emitted a series of melodic tones, almost as if it were trying to communicate. Ellie's eyes widened. "It's intelligent." Vakarth's growl deepened. "Intelligence does not make it less dangerous." Ignoring his warning, Ellie stepped forward cautiously. "We don't know what it wants. Let me try." She activated her comm device, setting it to record and analyze the creature's sounds. As the tones filled the air, the device translated fragments of meaning. Protect, balance, intrusion. It's talking about the ecosystem," Ellie said, her excitement growing. "It's not an enemy, it's a guardian." Vakarth's eyes narrowed. "A guardian that has remained hidden until now? Why?" Ellie's mind raced. Maybe the conflict between the Drathraks and the Aqualites disrupted something. It could be responding to the imbalance. The creature emitted another tone, this one urgent. Ellie's device translated a single word: restore.